Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. So, Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
A listener sent an article on the California Public Utilities Commission. They're voting on a proposed decision to prohibit residents of multi-meter properties to consume their own rooftop solar production, even if they own the solar array.
Well, so now you can own solar panels and collect your own energy, but you're not allowed to use it anymore.
But you're not allowed to use it. Now, of all places,
why not?
This is California, who supposedly was leading the nation in green energy.
You could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not. California's been giving tax breaks to people to install solar for years now.
Right. All sorts of tax incentives to install it, and now this law, note the wording, the law only applies, at least for the moment, or it would only apply to multi-meter properties. So picture an apartment building.
We're going after those dirty landlords.
We're going after the landlords. It's unclear whether a college dorm, for example, would apply here. Maybe not, since the individual rooms aren't metered, but college dorms are mentioned in the article. But nonetheless, they're going after the landlords. And it raises this question, okay, so here I am, I'm a landlord, I've got multi-meter properties here, I've got a solar array that powers the whole thing, I'm not allowed to use my own energy, what am I supposed to do according to the California Public Utilities Commission?
Can I guess?
Go ahead.
My guess is that you must take all that energy and sell it to the power company at wholesale rates, and then they'll turn around and sell you power at retail rates.
That is exactly right. Yes. Under the rule, you must sell the electricity at a low price to the local utility and then buy it back at a high price. Now, stop and think about that for a moment. Forget about the stupidity that's right up front, that I'm paying for this system and now I'm required to sell to you at a low price, buy back at a high price, stuff that I already had. Forget about all that for a minute and think about the environmental implications, right? It's something like, if memory serves, 50% of energy is lost in transmission. So you've got a power plant generates 100% power and only 50% reaches the household. The rest of it's lost to power transmission. And maybe that number is too high, but nonetheless, it's some number is lost to transmission. What they're requiring here is that I produce energy that I could use right here. But no, I send it across the power lines with the commensurate loss of power, and then I bring back across the power lines, again with commensurate loss of power, so other electricity, and use that. This is just complete if you were to design a law that was bad for the environment, an anti-green law, let's call it a brown law, it would be this.
And, let's not forget the horrifying implication on property rights.
Right. In fact, you know what came to mind as I'm reading this? Is that case in India, and this would have been during the time of Gandhi, where the British prohibited the Indians from making salt, their own salt for their own use. You get whatever the seawater is and you evaporate it and all of this, which is what the Indian villagers were doing. You're not allowed to do that. Instead, you have to buy salt from the approved British sellers, whoever those were.
The American analog here is Wickard v. Filburn, a Supreme Court case you and I have talked about more than once, where a farmer was told by the federal government that he couldn't grow corn or wheat, whatever it was, on his own land to feed his own cattle.
Right.
Because interstate commerce. When he pointed out, well, there's nothing interstate about this, given that it's on my farm, which is in the territory of one state and one state alone, the federal government came up with the argument, no. If you use the material you grow yourself to feed your own cows, well, then you won't buy it on the open market. And when you don't buy it on the open market, prices then are affected. So it is interstate commerce. You're just too stupid to realize it.
It was an astounding argument.
This seems to me to carry on the exact same logic. You're collecting energy for your own use in your own property. And here's the California government saying, no, you can't do that. You must sell what you have to us at a price we deem correct. And then you must buy it back at another price we deem correct. The first price is going to be very, very low. The second price, very, very high. And you citizen will just have to deal with that.
It would raise the question in most people's minds, why is California doing this? There's an interesting paragraph here at the end of the article where it says that the purpose of this law is to make it more fair, because what happens now is if you generate your own electricity, you aren't paying to help maintain the infrastructure, the electrical grid infrastructure, which makes it more expensive for people who are using it.
There's another analog yet. Electric cars now are being taxed in a number of jurisdictions. Why? Because they're not paying the gas tax.
Right.
And who will repair the roads if you're not paying the gas tax by driving these electric cars that all the same state governments were encouraging you to buy right up until they put the tax in place?
A couple of years ago, we did an episode and we talked about exactly this. And you and I made exactly this prediction, that the government's putting all of this money into subsidies to push people into electric cars. And what's going to happen? There's going to be a substantial reduction in tax revenues for the roads, and the government's going to turn around with the other hand and start taxing back, which is exactly what you're describing there. And it's the same kind of thing we're seeing here with the California Public Utilities Commission.
You should expect to see a lot more of this kind of thing to the entrepreneurial sorts out there who went out of their way to figure out a way to live more cheaply. The government does not like thrift. I've got something that's more uplifting than that. I want to talk about a man named Marc Gauthier from Bordeaux, France. He's 63 years old, and this one cuts close to home for reasons you'll all see in just a moment. Gauthier has a very advanced case of Parkinson's disease. He couldn't walk. That's the end stage of Parkinson's. And for those of you who don't know, I myself have Parkinson's, so I pay close attention to these sorts of things. A medical team implanted a device at the base of his spine with a battery installed under the skin of his stomach. The device stimulates nerves and it amplifies the signals sent from his brain to his legs, right? And there's the problem with Parkinson's that they don't quite get there, or they get there incorrectly. Now, Gauthier could barely walk. I mean, barely walk. He wasn't leaving home. It was that kind of a debilitating condition. He can go outside and walk 4 miles without a cane.
How about that?
This is astonishing. And they found somebody who was quite bad off. And there are, deep brain implants and things like that that have limited success. But this one seems to be an unqualified success. And what other applications we'll find with this, but they may have just changed the lives of everybody who has Parkinson's. Not only at the end stage when we can't walk anymore, but in that portion of life where you're looking forward to losing your ability to walk. You may know now that that portion of the program is not coming. That will cause a radically different kind of lived life for people with this disease.
It's astounding to me how fast technology is moving now. I just finished watching a British detective series on Netflix, Bodies. Part of it is set in the future, and in the future, the one detective has exactly this thing you're describing. And this series came out just within the past year.
Reality caught up with sci-fi pretty quickly this time around.
Yeah, that's astounding. This is the part that people don't think about when they talk about the state of healthcare. We talk about the price of healthcare going up. And we've got, and this is just the latest example, all sorts of things that 50 years ago were science fiction that literally carried a price tag of infinity because they weren't possible. And now we get these treatments that used to have a price tag of infinity for merely a lot of money. That's massive deflation.
I'm sure Gauthier from this story, and we'll put the link in the show notes as always, I'm sure he got his for free, right? Because it's an experimental treatment. The next person to get it is going to pay through the nose.
But he'll only pay through the nose. It won't be infinity.
That's right. And if and when I need it in 20 years, it'll be covered by my insurance.
Yeah, and if anybody doubts that, what you just described, think about the cure to polio that's handed out for virtually free at schools, or at least when we were kids. You got, as a matter of course, the polio vaccine,
Pennies, yeah.
Which 100 years ago was science fiction.
I just read a very good academic article on the polio vaccine written by, of all people, my wife. It costs pennies to vaccinate entire towns. We vaccinated so many people, polio disappeared. You could vaccinate the whole world right now out of your own bank account.
And don't mistake us here. Polio in its day was like cancer is today.
The problem with polio was the terror that came with it because they had no idea how it passed from person to person.
And it routinely hit young kids.
Young kids, right. And once they found out that it was in bodies of water, it became clear why it hit young kids in a disproportionate way. But it was the terror of polio that was the important thing. It seemed impervious to class distinctions. Rich people got it, poor people got it. It just didn't matter who you were or where you lived or how you lived. You were probably going to get it. But when we talk about technology, and when we talk especially, I think, about medical technology, it's almost always good news. And it's such good news that I think people overlook it.
We take it for granted.
There are going to be a group of people now who are destined to die in wheelchairs who won't. And all that positivity, and of course, brings us to the foolishness of the week. I talk about grocery prices a lot. The sticker shock I get every time I walk into a grocery store. And that's a thoroughly regressive sort of tax. That's just pounding on the working class and the poor. How do I know that? Well, because I'm not working class and I'm not poor, and it's killing me.
Right.
In Canada, the House of Commons is inviting executives from Canada's top grocery store chains to appear before Parliament and explain what they're doing to control surging food prices. Those bastards are blaming the grocers for high grocery prices. It's the politicians' fault. Only politicians, and I want you to explain this to the nice people because I think a lot of people don't quite get this. Only politicians can create inflation.
You print money faster than what your economy is growing, that's how you get inflation.
Corporate profits don't yield inflation.
No.
People think that greedy corporate entities create inflation. They really believe this.
They might cause higher prices in one place in exchange for lower prices somewhere else. That's not inflation. But regardless, where grocery stores are concerned, I don't know the case in Canada, but in the US, the profit margin at grocery stores is like 1%. 1%.
1 to 3% is the grocery store margin. When you see those things in the flyer that they send out, everybody used to call those loss leaders, right? Why? Because the grocery store makes so little money on things that they're actually going to take a loss on the things in the flyer. They're selling them for less than it cost in order to get you into the store, hoping you'll buy other things too.
That's correct.
That's how little grocers make. And the Canadian government is calling them on the carpet to explain what they're going to do to lower prices.
This is political theater because so long as the politicians can keep the voters angry at those greedy food corporations, the less likely the voters are to notice that the real culprit is the politicians themselves.
The only smart thing would be for every grocer to walk in and say, food prices are high because of you. What are you going to do to lower food prices?
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
So you found us a pretty ridiculous story for this weekend.
I was going to use this story as a quick hit, just something up front, a light something. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought there's some really interesting questions here. So let me lay out for the folks what the story is.
I'm going to interject a couple of times because I don't want them to miss the important parts.
Okay. This article, and we'll put it in the show notes so you can read the whole thing for yourself, is about an elderly French couple who were clearing out their attic and ran across an African mask, one of these ceremonial masks, and didn't think much of it. Called the local antiques dealer, sold it to him. They agreed at a price of $150. This was in September of 2021. Some months later, the elderly couple discovered that the mask sold...
Hang on. Everybody's going to miss this important intervening part, and I don't want us to. The owner of the antique shop, the guy who bought the mask, didn't know what it was worth.
No, he didn't.
He went out and he said, I should have this valued by somebody who knows better.
Yeah, there's the thing. He suspected it was worth something to cause him to do that.
He wouldn't have bought it if he didn't expect it was worth something, right? And he sent it out to the first appraiser, and the guy said $300. They sent it out to the second appraiser, and the guy said $400. And it was the third appraiser.
The third appraiser, as I recall, the appraiser, one of them, put a price of $300,000 on it.
That was the third appraiser, yes.
Okay.
So the antiques dealer was probably thinking at that moment like he had hit the jackpot.
Right. But then he puts the thing up on auction, and it goes on auction for $4.4 million.
That's somewhat more than 300, 400, or even 300,000.
And certainly more than the 150 that he paid the couple. But then what happens here, and this is the point of the article, is the couple then sued in French court. Now, this thing is, as of the date of the article, which was early October 2023, the case is still in the court system, but it's at the appeals level. And what's interesting is the appeals court judge saw enough merit in the case that he froze the proceeds from the sale. The judge says that the couple's claim that they had been cheated, quote, appears to be well-founded in principle.
Yeah, and look, I don't know anything about French law. That's not why we're talking about this. We're talking about this because there are interesting things that arise. Not legal things necessarily, but economic things.
Well, there's economic things. There's an interesting moral question here that, and I would imagine most people would feel some sense of moral outrage.
Oh, I don't know about that. Look, we often say, I know I often say that as long as there is neither force nor fraud in your dealings with one another, that your dealings are perfectly fine. Now, they brought that to the shop and said, do you want to buy this? And the owner of the shop took a look at it and said, yeah, I'll give you $157 for it. And they said, okay, no force, no fraud.
Yeah, there's no force, there's no fraud, but I can feel the reaction that, look, this was a $4.4 million mask. Does the dealer have some obligation to share some of that with the couple?
No, of course he doesn't. He owns it now. Did the couple have any obligation to share it with whoever they got it from?
Well, that's an interesting question, because suppose it went the other way. Suppose the dealer called up and the appraiser says, oh no, this is a piece of junk. In fact, it's made of plastic. It's not worth anything. Would the couple then be obligated to give him back part of his 150? I don't think anybody would say yes.
No, we would not. And as long as there was no force and no fraud, right? If they lied about it walking in the door, and then it was later learned that the thing is worthless, yeah, they're on the hook for that. But if they walked in and told the truth, no, that's just how life goes.
But it feels to people like fraud if, for example, and this isn't the case here, I don't think, but let's suppose for simplicity that the dealer knew it was worth $4.4 million and offered the couple 150 and they said yes. That feels like fraud.
I disagree, although I understand why people have the knee-jerk reaction to go that way. Because people misunderstand a deal entered freely with a deal that we would consider fair.
Mm-hmm.
People want outcomes to be what they are, but you don't get to pick outcomes. You get to pick the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are that if I offer you something for sale and you buy it from me, then you own it. And I no longer have a claim. And if you later find out that that thing made you very rich and left me very poor, you don't owe me anything as a result of that. I should have taken greater care to go to an appraiser. And let's keep in mind, the guy with the shop paid appraisers to get the value.
Which the couple could have done.
They could have done that any time they wanted throughout the course of owning that object. But the object meant so little to them, it sat in an attic, and then they brought it to an antique shop. Is that a mistake? Yeah, that's a mistake. This is kind of like somebody selling at the church tag sale a crappy picture in a really nice frame. And then, the person just buys it for the frame and takes the crappy picture out and finds an original copy of the Declaration of Independence underneath.
Right.
That he bought for, a quarter. Does he own it? He bought it at the church sale.
Yeah, and I follow you, but there's an important difference there. If I sell you this frame, and we both think it's just an empty frame.
We don't think it's an empty frame. We just don't know that it's the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, fine. I sell it to you. Neither one of us knows or even suspects that it is. In that sense, it feels different because the information is symmetric. Now, yes, you ended up with a copy of Declaration that you got for nothing, but at the time the transaction took place, neither one of us knew more than the other. In the couple's case, it's different in that the dealer knew more. And I think that's the sense of people's outrage.
But he didn't know much more. He didn't know what it was worth. He sent it off to be valued. He just had a suspicion.
He did, but the fact that he sent it out 3 times tells me that that was more than a suspicion. He knew something.
The fact of the matter remains is the couple who owned it previously could have known that too. They chose not to. They chose to sell it, and when somebody bought it, their claim goes away.
Yeah, and my point here is I think people's sense of moral outrage comes from that asymmetry of information. I think you're absolutely right that it didn't need to be asymmetric. The couple could have hired an appraiser themselves. But I think it's the asymmetry that bothers people.
I don't know about that. I think it's the outcome that bothers people. I think they see that somebody got rich and somebody didn't. And whenever we see that, we just naturally assume that whoever got rich did so on the back of somebody who deserved it more. And frankly, I think that kind of thinking is ridiculous. I think it permeates us as not only a society, but as a species. And I think that's probably what we're looking at here.
It flies in the face of subjective value.
This is the interesting thing to talk about here.
At the time that they made the transaction, so picture I'm the elderly couple, and I'm selling this thing. The guy offers me $157 for it. By definition, I value the $157 more than I value the mask. If that weren't the case, I wouldn't be selling it.
That's right. And it's weird that this comes up today because my family had this discussion at dinner last night. Right. What makes anything worth anything was the question on the table. And to guys like us, the answer to that question is so easy and so unbelievably clear that we don't even talk about it.
Right.
Something is worth exactly what someone else will give you for it, nothing more, nothing less.
It's worth that to the person. It may be worth something different to you.
At that moment. This is why markets are so great, because they aggregate the answer, right? You can offer something and find out how people value it pretty quickly. I think I've told this story before. I didn't realize at the time how clearly this dovetailed with a classic economics example, which you can talk about. But they dropped me off in Iraq in August. And, they gave me an apartment, a key. They gave me enough food to last me about 4 hours. And I thought, okay, I better get out of the apartment and go find, where I buy food and the whatnot. The only thing they told me that first day was, whatever you do, don't wear shorts when you leave. You got to wear long pants. And I thought, okay, 118 degrees. I'm wearing a pair of jeans. Let's go walking around in the Middle East and see what life is like. And I found out that was a special kind of heat. It was really painful. It was so hot and so windy that you would walk out the door and you'd feel the sweat just come out every pore of your body, and yet your clothes would never be wet.
Mm-hmm.
You knew you were sweating, and the clothes were never wet.
That's why you like Tucson so much. It reminds you of Iraq.
It does. It reminds me of home. Anyway, I got thirsty fast, as you might well imagine. And, they say, well, whatever you do, don't drink the tap water. Not that when you're walking around in town, you can get tap water. But every single corner store, and there were corner stores everywhere, every single corner store had a gigantic cooler of bottled water out front. Now, I had no idea how much any of this stuff cost. Nothing, right? I just figured, well, I best get some water. And I grabbed a bottle and I walked in and I held it up the way foreigners who don't speak the language do. And I held out a handful of money the way they do when they don't understand what kind of money they're dealing with. And the guy took the money he needed for the bottle, and I left. And outside, I did some quick math. Ice water in the desert, 18 cents.
Huh.
And then I found out that the price everywhere in town was 18 cents. Now, that water If you think about it, priceless.
Without it, you die.
That's right. Under the right circumstances, you could literally charge me every penny I have for one bottle of water, and I'd pay it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that didn't happen. Why, Mr. Economist, did that never happen?
It didn't happen because value is subjective. It's not objective. And so how much you're willing to pay for the water is a function of, well, when was the last time you had water? How hot is it? How dry are you? All of these things. Now, granted, if you were within minutes of dying because you haven't had water, you'd be willing to pay whatever, take my entire year's salary for one of those bottles. And you'd actually be better off making that trade than not making it, because you make the trade, you've lost your year's salary, but you're alive. You don't make it, you die. And that's the essence of exchange, that you make the exchange because it makes you better off than you were otherwise.
And how I value the water is the important question.
Yeah, how you value the water. And in turn, how the person who's providing it values it. Because it costs the person who's providing it something to bring it there. If you don't pay him enough, then he says, look, it's not worth it to me to do this, so I'm not going to bring you any more.
Sure, but we have functioning markets for water in deserts.
Yes.
I mean, the common observation is about water and diamonds, right, which is worth more.
Yeah, the diamond water paradox, we call it, and we teach this in Principles Econ.
If you think diamonds are more valuable than water, you're an idiot. Of course, if I offered to trade you a bottle of water for a gigantic diamond, and you do it, you're an idiot. You're in the middle of something interesting here.
Yeah, and the something that's interesting goes back to this subjective value. If you're in a situation where you've had plenty of water, you're not dying of thirst, you're not dying of starvation, this sort of thing. What do you not have? You don't have a big fat diamond. In fact, you're looking to get engaged. You'd like to have a big fat diamond to give to your fiancé. You're in a situation where the value of that diamond to you is very high. But it's very high because you have all of these other things. So you would value one more apple, one more cup of water, one more pair of shoes, less than you would value the one more diamond, because you don't have any of those. Now, change your circumstances. Take away all the food, take away your clothing, take away your shoes. All of a sudden, I'd much rather have one more cup of water, one more pair of shoes than to have that one diamond.
Every young person knows about subjective value. If you've got a job, right, but you're not wealthy, and you go to the store and you pick up a leather jacket and you think, wow, I really want that leather jacket. Look at that. And then you look at the price tag and it says $900. And you see, but it's not worth $900, and you put it back. Well, it wasn't worth $900 to you. There are lots and lots of people to whom $900 is a pittance, and if they see that leather jacket on the shelf and they think it's especially nice, they'll just pick it up and buy it. The way that a young person might pick up and buy a $60 video game. It costs something. It's not free, but, it's not the end of the world. I know a lot of 60-year-old guys who look at $900 jackets like that, buy them, wear them once, and never think about them again. Okay, well, what was the jacket worth? Well, it was worth one amount to one person and one amount to another person.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We say, what was X worth? And that's the wrong phrase. It should always be, what is X worth to me or to you?
But we get lost because the store charges $900.
Yes, and all we see is that. And so you say, oh, it must be worth $900.
And to some people it is, and to other people it isn't.
Exactly.
And there you go. And the store has to do its research to figure out exactly where the right pricing structure is for everything that it sells, not just this one jacket. But when you walk in and you say, well, it's not worth $900, and you throw it back down in disgust, you've made your call.
Well, you have. Now, there's a counter argument that people will give that's along these lines. They'd say, well, the jacket is worth $900 to me. I just can't afford it.
I don't have $900.
Yeah.
That misunderstands how these words are used.
Well, I think we can do it without messing with the words too much. Because if you tell me, yes, the jacket's worth $900 to me, I just can't afford it, what you have really said is it's worth $900 after I buy all the other stuff I want to buy first, because that stuff's worth even more than $900. How do I know? Because I bought it first before I thought about buying the jacket.
Everybody thinks, well, a deal is a quid pro quo. You walk in and both sides have an agreement and they exchange something of equal value. That is not what a deal is. It's not a quid pro quo. Each side is better off than when he walked in.
Yes.
If Ant and I do a deal, we don't do the deal because we think we've got some sort of equal value in our hands that we can exchange. I think that what Ant has in his hand will make me infinitely better off or marginally better off, somewhere in between those two things, than what I have in my hand.
Right.
And he thinks the exact same thing about what I have in my hand. Now, we could be wrong. That's irrelevant. We think that what the other person has is better than what we have. And if that weren't true, no one would ever make a deal for anything.
Yeah, and let's underline that piece. I made a note on that here, just as you were saying it. The easy proof that value is subjective, not objective, is the following. If value were objective, that a thing has a certain value and that's its value to everybody, if that were true, there would be no markets. There'd be no exchange at all. Because why? I walk into the store to buy a loaf of bread and the loaf of bread has a price tag of $3 and that's its objective value. If indeed that's its objective value, why would I pay $3 for it? I'm giving up $3 and getting $3 worth of bread. And why would the store sell it? Because it's selling bread that's worth $3 and getting $3 back. There'd be no exchange at all. In fact, the argument that you often hear from people that, well, businesses should be allowed a fair profit, is that it's objective value with an asterisk, that there is an objective value, but you should put plus 12% for the business or whatever it is.
This is going to be yet another their fair share argument. Who gets to decide what that is? What is it, by the way? Go ahead, tell me what that is. Because if you tell me that my fair profit is 6%, I'm not going into business.
It's not worth the risk.
I don't want to kill myself and put everything I own at risk for a 6% payout at the end. That's ridiculous. I'll go get a job.
This is also where people's misguided sense of income inequality comes from. Because when we talk about income inequality, we only look at half of transactions. We look at the people who collect the dollars on the dollar side of the transaction. We ignore the people who collect the goods and services on the other side. So I buy something from you for $100. And when somebody goes and performs the inequality calculation, they're going to say, oh, there's inequality here. James has $100 and Ant has nothing. They're ignoring the object I bought from you, which I now have and you don't.
This doesn't sound like income to me, but okay.
Well, but that's the thing. When we talk about income, we only think of dollars. We think of the dollar that's gained in the transaction. We don't think of the object that's gained in the transaction.
But we don't typically think of objects when we think of income, right? We think about going to a job and performing labor.
Exactly. And similarly, we don't think of objects when we think of profit. So if you sell me the clock on the wall behind you for $100 that it cost you $75 to buy, we'll say that you made a $25 profit. But what we don't do is say, well, look, Ant got this clock. He paid $100 for it, but he would have paid $150. I really made a $50 profit because I got $150 worth of clock for $100.
Or $157, only to find out later that it was worth $4.4 million.
In the case of the couple, they got $157 for what they thought was garbage, which to them, it was. How do I know? Because they accepted $157 for it.
Because they sold the thing, that's right. And you see just how simple the complex task of economics gets. But wait, Ant, there's more. Inherent value. Literally not one thing on earth or in heaven has inherent value.
Well, if you're going to get metaphysical, I'd have to put footnotes. But yes, objects don't have inherent value.
I said in heaven just to get you. Nothing on earth has inherent value. Things only have subjective values that people assign to them.
The argument you often hear along these lines relates to gold, that the dollar should be backed by gold because gold has inherent value. And I push people on this. I said, what do you mean that gold has inherent value? Well, it's valuable simply because it's gold. In their minds, it's, I can take this gold and give it to somebody and they'll give me stuff I want. But I can do that with dollars. In fact, I do it every day. I give people dollars, they give me stuff I want.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, way easier to do with dollars than with gold.
Exactly, yes.
The argument that they're really making is that they trust gold to be money longer than they trust dollars to be money.
Or in other words, they trust that other people will value gold more than or longer than they will value paper dollars. Yeah.
Money is simply an agreement to use something as a means of exchange.
Yep.
Money really is that simple. Everybody knows dollars are worthless. We all know this. Except they're not. I can go to the store and buy shit with them all the time. They're not worthless at all.
Now, someone's going to push back on you, James, and say, but hang on, I can build things with gold. I can make jewelry with them.
No, of course you can. I could build things with dollars.
Exactly. You could make jewelry out of paper dollars as well. It's just that nobody would want it.
That's right. Matter of fact, they're making purses out of Venezuelan currency right now.
Yes.
Because it costs less to use the currency than it does to go out and buy paper with the currency.
Germany, during the hyperinflation, they used the Deutschmarks as wallpaper because they were actually cheaper than buying wallpaper.
There are some Reichmarks in my family. We've got 500,000 Reichmarks. That sounds like quite a lot. It was worth less than a single pat of butter. All currency becomes worthless sooner or later because the worth of a currency is necessarily attached to the legitimacy of the regime that released it. That's not true of gold. Gold is gold regardless of regime. So you get beyond the immediate problem of currency, but you're still left with the intermediate problem of currency. It's still something we all agreed is money. John Locke, in the second treatise, asked, and this is in the 17th century, right, asked why it is that a shiny yellow metal that we all pulled out of the ground serves as money.
Mm-hmm.
That's the correct question. And the answer isn't because it has some sort of inherent worth. It doesn't glow at night and keep your house warm, right? It doesn't do something that would otherwise bankrupt you. It's a means of exchange. That's it. It's only that because we agree to it. And there are a million reasons why we agree to it, right? It's relatively rare. It's hard to pull out of the ground. It's portable. It's easily identifiable, right? There's a bunch of perfectly good reasons why we would default to gold and not, say, turquoise.
So when you say we agreed to it, let's just be clear here, you don't mean that everybody sat down and signed a document saying we hereby agree to accept gold. It's not an explicit, it's an implicit agreement.
Let's dwell on that for a moment. All the anarchists say, I never agreed to live here, right? Here you are. And that's right. We didn't have a big meeting about gold and whether we were going to use it. It's an emergent phenomenon. That's just how it came about. Because it came about, we can say perfectly accurately, we agree. Does everybody agree? No. And yet that doesn't matter at all. The vast majority of us agree, and therefore this is money. When the vast majority of us don't agree, it ain't money anymore.
Right.
Which is why I heard last night, wife told the story about how at one point in our history, a certain kind of feather was very, very valuable as currency. I'm not taking feathers tomorrow, not for anything. Don't want to hear it. The open question in my mind, if somebody wanted to have, say, a $10,000 contract with me to do some work tomorrow, would I take dollars? Yep. Would I take gold? Yeah, sure. Would I take silver? Would I take palladium? All right, we're starting to get to my outer limits here. I'm not sure I could identify palladium correctly. You could probably get over on me if we're going to deal with platinum or palladium. But maybe. Would I take Bitcoin? Okay. Would I take Bitcoin Cash? Would I take Ethereum? How far down that list do I go before I say, all right, that's enough? Is Bitcoin money? Well, I don't know. I can't go to the 7-Eleven and buy a pack of cigarettes with it. So the immediate answer is no, because money is what we use to buy stuff. But money's also a way we store wealth. Kind of do that with Bitcoin. It's not perfect, but it's better than all kinds of other things. Better than, say, apples, which spoil.
Right, yeah.
Now, we go back to this elderly couple. Was the mask worth $4.4 million? Yep. Was the mask worth $157?
Also, yes. It was worth $4.4 million to somebody, $157 to somebody else.
This often comes up when we talk about salaries. we say, well, the CEO isn't worth 7,000 times an hour what the janitor is worth. Yes, he is.
How do you know? Because someone's willing to pay him that.
You're always worth exactly what you're making right now.
Yeah, and let me pause and give you an exception to that. And the exception is when the transaction is not voluntary. You could look at a president of the United States who makes $450,000. You could say, well, is he worth that? And you can't say yes the same way you can say yes about the CEO. And the reason you can't say yes about the president is because we don't have a choice. Congress said, you taxpayers will pay this person this amount of money.
Right, but he had a choice, right? If he's not a rich man, he can say, look, I can't afford to take
that's
8
true.
years out of my life and make that money. I need to make a real living.
We can say it's worth it to him. Whether it's worth it to the taxpayer, I don't know. We were never given the option. But what's interesting is when you switch to thinking about the CEO is very different there. Now, someone might say in response, yeah, but the board of directors makes that decision, just like Congress makes the decision. So I, the customer, don't have a say in the CEO's salary. And I say, absolutely you do. Your say begins and ends with your choice to buy the CEO's product. If you don't like what he's making, you don't think it's worth it, go buy somewhere else.
And that's exactly the point, right? Because the CEO got the salary because the people, the board of directors typically, who represent the shareholders, and on and on and on, were all utterly convinced that that human being, for whatever the reason, could convince even more people to buy the product.
Yeah.
That's his job, not only to run the business and make sure it's efficient, but to find more people to buy more product. It gets more interesting than this because, look, acting isn't hard. I do it every day. So does it.
What, you act like a smart person?
No, I am a smart person. I act like I'm having a good time in a conversation with somebody from time to time. I act like I'm not explaining basic things to that same person over and over and over again. But Brad Pitt gets paid $20 million to act in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a lot of money. He is worth it. He got paid that much. Sometimes he's going to get paid $20 million and the movie's going to flop. And you know what? He won't have been worth it. And everybody will get spanked if they invested in that monstrosity. Other times, that will be such a drop in the bucket to the return on the movie that it'll just be laughable, right? And look, markets sort these things out. Your opinion doesn't really matter. The opinions that matter are Brad Pitt's on the one hand and the people who paid him on the other. Those are the opinions that matter. The
only opinions that matter are the buyers and the sellers. That's it. And what we had with the mask is a buyer and a seller, both of them saying 157 is the right number.
And one of them was thinking to himself, oh, I got them. I got them. They're going to sell me this and it's going to be worth way more than this. And the other two said, we got him.
He got a piece of crap out of our attic.
We're going out for dinner tonight, and it's going to be really good, and he's paying for it.
Yeah, yeah.
We just got angry. Oh, we didn't. Personally, I don't care, right? You do your due diligence, and you give it your shot. And look, I've been taken selling things, buying things. We all have. Do I like that? No, I don't. Do I think that there are ways that you can legislate against that sort of thing? Yes. Should we in every instance? No, I don't think so.
Now, this is a good thing to underline. The difference between what we're discussing now, this transaction involving the mask, where one party knows more than the other, and a different matter, which is fraud.
Fraud is always different.
Fraud is a very different matter. Yes, again, there's a difference in information, but the difference in information is because one party is misrepresenting to the other. That's a wholly different matter than one party knows something the other one doesn't.
Had those people walked in, and let's make them clever, right? Let's not make them cartoon characters. If they had walked in and they said, look, we don't know much about the mask, but we do know that an ancestor brought it back from the wilds of Africa in the 16th century. We don't know much about the ancestor, but, here's the genealogy that we have. And all of this is fabricated from whole cloth. That's a really effective kind of lie because you create a scaffolding and then the other person projects right onto it, just builds right onto the scaffolding. Whatever he wants to see, he will now see. And this is how liars at open-air markets always sell things, right? They don't tell you this was once owned by Louis XIV. They said, yeah, this came from France. I think my ancestors got it in some kind of backhand deal in the 18th century, and we never really found out anything about it. But if you want me to believe you didn't find out anything about something from the 18th century that's been in your family the whole time, you're lying, and I know it. But these are the kinds of effective lies that people tell. This is fraud. Making exact replicas of things. That's fraud.
Making them and claiming they're the original. That's fraud.
Yeah, I mean, look, the people who listen, I have probably talked about my love of watches so much that everybody kind of just rolls their eyes at this point. But I can tell you this. I look at watches the way men my age look at pornography. Every single night I look at the watches. There are all kinds of models that I would really love to own and that I will never own. Let's just say the Blank Pan 50 Fathoms dive watch. Perfect example. I don't have tens of thousands of dollars to spend on a watch. If I did, I still might not buy it because, again, other things are worth money too. But I can buy a Chinese replica, not an homage, not something that looks a lot like it, a 1-to-1 exact copy for like $800. That's fraud.
You're saying that's fraud?
They are engaged in fraudulent activity when they produce the watches. When they sell it for $800 to me, I understand what I'm getting. When I wear it, I am projecting something that is untrue.
Oh, you're projecting a fraud. I see. Yeah, but no, if they're selling it to you and they're telling you this is not an original, it's a knockoff, everybody knows that.
And I've seen people sell those knockoffs for $50,000. That's fraud.
That's fraud. Yes.
I'll be honest, I kind of want to buy one all the time because then I could walk around my house and look at my wrist and at least know what it was like to have that watch on my wrist. I would know it's not the same. Frankly, I don't think that counterfeiters of goods should be allowed to apply their craft. But God, the watch counterfeiters have gotten so good at it lately. I want the green Rolex Submariner. It's like $40,000. I could buy a Chinese green Rolex Submariner that looks exactly the same and that probably functions exactly as well. It's not like you're buying some kind of cheap quartz thing that you would get at the swap meet. No, you're getting a high quality handmade automatic watch. I can get that for $600. Here's the question, Ant. Is the Rolex worth $40,000?
To you, it is.
Well, how could it be if I can get a replica, which for all intents and purposes is just as good for $600?
Look, you're a connoisseur of watches. Let's assume for the moment that we both had the money to buy it.
I'm going to show the nice people on the Patreon what I'm wearing today. Isn't that nice?
You've messed up our podcast because so what we're doing here, for those of you who are listening, we have video running at the same time, which we put up on our Patreon account. So if you want to sponsor us at patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
And see which watch I'm wearing every week.
Yes, exactly. But for the people who are listening, they'd have no idea what you're talking about. Let me go back to my point.
No, that's right.
My point is this. You as a connoisseur can see the $14,000 watch versus the virtually identical $800 watch. And to you, the $14,000 watch is worth much more because you understand it. You know that this is the original and all that goes with it. I, who know nothing about these things, I'd look at the two watches. They're absolutely identical. I'd say, yeah, give me the $800 one. So we're back to subjective value.
In a thing that happens between us quite often that makes me crazy in the head like you wouldn't believe. You actually don't think any watch is worth any dollars.
That's right.
You don't own one. And you say what Philistines like you often say. My phone has a clock on it. It's always right. I don't have to worry about it.
Let me throw out a counter-argument I could hear someone giving. And that's a counter-argument to me saying, look, Davies, you've just got it wrong. That, you don't want that $14,000 watch because you don't value watches. But if you had the $14,000 watch, you could sell it for $14,000. To which I reply, you're just underlying the fact that it's not worth $14,000 to me. How do I know? Because if I had it, I'd sell it and take the $14,000.
Yeah, and it's that you have it, not that you bought it.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So if you won it on a game show, what would you do?
Yeah, I'd sell it and get $14,000.
And you would sell it and I would keep it.
Yeah, because we have different subjective values.
because value is necessarily and inextricably linked to taste. And you know what I have no taste for? African masks.
Mm-hmm.
Don't care.
And neither did the elderly couple.
If that lady had offered me that mask for $157, I would have looked at it, and you can all look at it too, the pictures in the article. I would have looked at it and said, no, thank you.
Now, had you known it was worth $4.4 million, you would have bought it, but not because you valued the mask, but because you knew that somebody else did to the tune of $4.4 million.
That's right. I would have paid her $160 and told her to keep the change.
Well, here's something interesting to consider. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that the French court says, yes, indeed, the dealer owes half of this $4.4 million to the elderly couple. Why does it stop there? Why does the court not then say, okay, elderly couple, where did you get that mask? Because whoever you got it from, you owe them half of your $2.2 million.
And that's never going to happen. If you're out there thinking that this is fair, you're just making the same argument that the people who are convinced everything in the world is about colonialism make. So what we're left with here is a very basic question. Was there an agreement between the parties? Yes. Was there force or fraud in the agreement? No. We're done here. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time, be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.